Our next panel will be Prescribing Blockchain for Clinical Trials. Has the penny dropped for Big Pharma? Clinical trials are costly, risky endeavors that have long development timelines, low success rates, and often run over budget due to delays in patient enrollment, data management, and various other factors. Big pharmaceutical firms are banking on blockchain to ring in big money changes by speeding up clinical trials and ultimately lowering drug development costs. I'd like to bring our esteemed panelists to the stage, starting with our moderator, Lorrie Carr, who is the current CEO of ExceleraRx. Her claim to fame is supporting a large network of academic medical centers and IDNs who are interested in utilizing new technology to deliver high quality integrated care. Thank you, Lorrie. Welcome to the stage. There we go. Mike,
can you hear me now? Ooh. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us on this panel. As I want to take a moment to. I can't hear myself. It's going in and out. Have to leave it up. It keeps cutting in and out. Is it? Oh, this is much better. Okay, thank you. All right, thanks for having us here this afternoon. I want to take a minute to introduce my esteemed panelists. First, we'll bring up Karim Babay, founder and CEO of Health Sapiens, a company progressing healthcare for humankind. Karim's claim to fame is that he called the housing bubble back in 2005 when he was at Lehman Brothers. Next, I will bring up Emmanuel Fombu, Global Commercial Strategy and Digital Innovation for Johnson & Johnson. And Emmanuel's claim to fame is that he's a healthcare futurist turned Silicon Valley entrepreneur and winner of the 2017 Boldest Digital Health Influencer Award from the New York City Health Business Leaders. And then finally, last but not least, Timon Schicht from Innoplexus. His claim to fame is democratized data for healthcare by pioneering proprietary blockchain-based distributed ledger ecosystem. So thank you guys for joining me on stage. I'm going to stand over here while I keep my questions fresh, but I'll certainly be directing them to you. So, you know, it's interesting in clinical trials where it's really important to have patient participation, lots of data. The data needs to be very accurate and protected. And so we're going to talk today a lot about what goes on with clinical trials, how each of your organizations has thought about blockchain as it relates to clinical trials. You know, but I thought maybe we would start with who owns the data, right? We've heard a lot about that, I think, throughout this conference, but in general, you know, getting to the bottom of who owns it today, and when we think about blockchain technology, who really maybe owns it tomorrow. So interested to hear from each of you on that. Emmanuel, if you want to start to answer that question in terms of how you see about who owns the data.
Sure, I think data ownership it's a very important topic, especially in healthcare. And the reason is not necessarily the fight between hospitals having the data or a patient having the data, right? The question is, when we look at like electronic health records, for example, and you have, you know, like lab work that you do, a different kind of health data that you collect, right? And today we have devices that collect data. The idea is, if we could use blockchain, for example, to decentralize the data, and the patient actually, or the consumer, has access to that data, we could do a lot of things and bypass a lot of barriers along the way, as opposed to, like, if you want to get data from a patient and you have to go to a hospital to then request the data, or go to a lab to request data. It's very different than if the patient has the data and it's secure. We could do a lot more research much faster than we could possibly do with as is today.
Great. Timon, I know you have a point of view on this as well.
Yeah, so I can only agree with you. The data, especially in Europe, when you look at Europe, the data privacy laws, the data protection rules, it's really difficult to get this data aggregated and place some analytics on top. But I think it's really important nowadays that we can somehow get access to this data, and there we are looking at blockchain technology as the best solution. And when you have that data, especially in rare diseases, if you look at orphan diseases, the data is, and the science is dispersed all over the world. And blockchain could be a solution to get this data all in one place. And when you have that, then you can come up with new innovations, new solutions, new therapies. And therefore I think, yeah, blockchain will have a bright future in the pharma industry.
Great. And Karim, actually, your company is dealing with a lot of patient information, over 1,000 providers, I think, 24/7 access to care. So you're collecting a significant amount of PHI and whatnot. So what are your thoughts in terms of what you're going to be able to do with that data and how blockchain potentially could impact that?
Beautiful. Well, Lorrie, I think the way we have conceived the system today is the data is properly owned by the patient, because we do really believe that the patient first need to have access to their own data. In the future, we envision a world whereby the data is co-owned by the patient in majority, the creator of the data, the providers, nurse, doctors, health systems, and those who custody the data, because we do believe that eventually the idea of custodying your own data is great, but I don't think it's really practical, and therefore somebody needs to be paid to custody the data and to give us obviously proper access to it. If you think about it as a bank, you still own your money, but obviously you're not going to hold it under your mattress. So that's I think when I think blockchain could be extremely powerful to help decentralize, push the data back to the patients, and eventually make that data available to whoever the patient wants to share it with.
Got it. Great. Emmanuel, you spend your days and nights thinking about innovation for J&J and as it relates to, I think, across the business, commercialization, clinical trials included. How do you think about the impact of blockchain and as it relates to even getting patients enrolled in clinical trials and things like that with this new technology? We heard in the last panel, education for patients and even providers is going to be really important here. So what kind of experience have you seen or do you have yet that just tells you that it's going to be easier or harder, given that it's already hard sometimes to get patients enrolled into clinical trials?
Correct. So that's a great question. I'm sure most of you have heard about the Apple Watch and the watch being able to predict the risk of someone having atrial fibrillation. That's actually a study I worked on. I'm a cardiologist by background, and that study, we were able to enroll 400,000 patients within 2 months in a particular study, right? And that was simple by sending a simple text message to patients because they had the data on their watch, right? And it was secure. And we could ask them, do you want to participate in the study? In a typical setting, to get that many patients in all my clinical programs that we have going on, for one study with about 1,000 patients, we spent over $1.2 billion. It takes about 7 years to actually do this particular study. But what we could partner with Apple, between us, Apple, and Stanford, we could pull this off in a very short amount of time, right? So now you have the Apple Watch coming up, and people could put on the watch, and you could predict the risk of you having a stroke, right? That's the kind of power that it comes in when the patient or the consumer has the data in their hands, right? I bypass RRB processes within hospitals, and it's instant, and we could get results very fast into the market.
Great, thank you. Karim, you and I were talking earlier about how we really focus on sick patients and not necessarily well patients, and you know the plethora of information that's available on the healthy population and how to be more preventative in terms of healthcare. How do you think, or do you think, blockchain can somehow play a role in that and not necessarily focus on the sick necessarily, but the future wellness of the globe actually?
Well, sure, Lorrie. I mean, we have probably around 180 countries. Only 40 are organized enough or rich enough, or maybe both, to have proper healthcare systems. And even those healthcare systems, none of them is properly incentivizing patients and providers to properly re-engage with their health. I think the issue that we are facing in the US, and around the world is like people are completely disengaged from their health. And they deal with healthcare episodically, so they go in and out of the system once they're sick, and obviously there's an issue of lack of continuity. And as I mentioned earlier when we had our pre-talk, I think most of the aggregate information that we are actually missing out and we're not focusing on is, I think, the biggest predictor of our health going forward. So I think putting the right incentives, and I think that's what blockchain gamifications to re-engage patients to follow specific guidelines and reward them, as a matter of fact, either share them data or listening to specific instructions from their providers is a pretty big predictor of how healthcare ought to develop over time. We think blockchain not only is a technology stack that could be layered on top of old silos that have been created to protect as opposed to share, it could be complemented by cryptography to put together the right incentives. And it has been proven. As a matter of fact, when we built Health Sapiens, we collapsed the healthcare cost by 30% by just not having a middleman between the providers and the patients. So providers are happy because they spend less time doing paperwork and admin stuff. And patients are extremely happy because having an insurance doesn't necessarily translate to you having access to care. And I think blockchain could absolutely streamline the process.
Great. You guys were nodding your heads. I don't know if you got some comments to add on that. I imagine you do.
Yeah, no, I just thought about, it's all about the right incentives and the right governance. And I think blockchain provides both of them, especially in our context. So if I'm a researcher, why should I share my data? If I'm a patient, why should I share my data? And for a researcher, it's simple. On our platform, he can upload his metadata, make it searchable seamlessly and shareable. And like this, he can even monetize his experiments, even failed experiments. And I think there are no failed experiments. It's just not proving the hypothesis. But it could be so valuable to another researcher. And like this, he can monetize his research to refund his own research. Everyone can publish. There's no peer review bias by any journals. And everyone can gain reputation. And of course, on this platform, there are the data providers and the ones who are actually using the data, like pharmas, biotechs. So you are in direct touch with the industry and with other researchers. So it makes it way more easy to collaborate and network. And that's how we at Innoplexus incentivize the users and the stakeholders of the platform.
So, Emmanuel, can you tell a little bit more about the Apple-Stanford collaboration, what that looks like, and what the ultimate goal of that project is?
Sure. So the goal is healthcare is going towards a direction where we are more proactive with healthcare as opposed to being more reactive, right? Where someone gets sick, they have a stroke, they go to the hospital. It's more expensive for the health system. So with artificial intelligence and data that we collect, the whole business model is, can we identify disease ahead of time before it happens? And you would say, I work for a pharmaceutical company, we make drugs, so why do I care about preventing someone from having a stroke, right? So that's a good question that comes up. The reason is we sign new kind of contracts called value-based contracts, right? So I make a drug, I go to the insurance company and I say, hey, you could use my drug, I charge you $5,000, for example, and I will make sure that your patients actually stay out of the hospital. And if I make sure they stay out of the hospital and I decrease your cost, you pay me $6,000, right? So we have those kind of contracts with insurance companies. So we are very interested in that. We're doing the same thing for depression. We have algorithms that could predict depression from voice, for example, as prevention. So we could do all those things now, right? So that's where healthcare is going, the industry is going, being this predictive model. So same thing, so heart disease was the first, but it's not the only one. We are doing it across the board.
Okay, great. In terms of cost savings, right? So when you think about the sheer expense of clinical trials for pharma companies now, it's pretty staggering. In what way do any or all of you see blockchain having some impact on bringing down the costs, making the trials more efficient and effective? We've talked about some of the benefits in terms of the output, but is there a way to really bring down the costs and make things maybe move more quickly or more efficiently?
I think the biggest barrier to to clinical trial recruitment is a couple of things. One, let's say you have headache, for example, and you go to your doctor and your doctor is not taking part in the clinical study, then you are not in the clinical study by default, right? It's much different if I actually make an ad and I say, hey, if I put a sign on the highway and I say, if you have a headache, please enroll in the study. It's much easier than me going to 1,000 doctors to convince them to find headache patients within each one of them. And I think that's the future where we're going, where the consumer could make that decision to participate in the study. And the only way to do it is if you have confidence that your data is secure in one centralized party. Like, that's the perfect way to do it, right? So we could bypass the other bodies and go directly to getting the data.
Did you have comment on the cost aspect of trials?
Yeah, so there's a funny story I would like to tell then. I have a colleague, she has a PhD in microbiology, and while she was doing her PhD, she was working on an experiment to get it right, and she wasted 1 year in finding the right, in tweaking the protocol in order to get this experiment done. And then after 1 year, luckily, she met some other guy at a conference who was doing the same experiment, and he told her how to tweak the protocol. And then after 1 year, she made it and made her PhD. But you know where I'm going. Like, if you would have a platform where you can seamlessly search through all the research which is out there, all the science, then she would have found at the very first day that there's a guy doing the same experiment successfully. She could have called him, or they could come to an agreement. She can buy the protocol design and the underlying data, and she doesn't even have to do the research on her own. So, like this, you're reducing the innovation redundancy and increase the innovation efficiency.
Got it. Yeah. Great. Do we need to take questions from the audience? Question? 1 second. Question? Question?
So I think you hear me, right?
Yes.
It's just strange. So I think when we do clinical trials, I think Novartis is now doing the first clinical trials with, or digital clinical trials, and they're trying to do something with the blockchain. I think privacy and who owns the data is still not an answered question. And as a physician, I don't think blockchain will move faster before we do a lot of legislations and rules. We have no problem with the technology. As a physician who's interested in all these digital solutions, excuse me, I think if you compare AI to blockchain, I think we'll move faster with AI than with a blockchain. One of the big hurdles is the Western countries, America, Japan, and even Europe. So even lately there was a report by Gartner. They don't think anything will pick up before 2024. So unless and until we solve this, and I think it's not going to be solved globally. You need to find a good use case in one country, maybe like UAE, where leadership are willing to do these things. Otherwise, I think we will just be lagging behind. It's a good technology, but it needs a lot of legislation.
You mentioned Novartis. You said Novartis earlier? Did you say Novartis?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I was on Novartis before I went to Johnson & Johnson, so I worked on that project at Novartis, right? Yeah. And you're perfectly correct, right? So that's why I'm fascinated being here, right? It's great to see, to be in a place where the government supports the idea like this, right? And you're driving towards things. Even China is way advanced in this particular space, right? We have cases of Estonia working on this, yes, but I think we need government support to get it done. Hopefully, I think blockchain has a perfect use case, but I think we are still playing with it and we're not making that full commitment. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think what really made this worse is people still linking it to the cryptocurrency.
Correct.
Well, I think I will add, I think the UAE, I mean, to your point, I mean, it could be a pretty solid use case because usually technology and innovation does not really come out of the government, but in the case of the UAE and other countries like Estonia, the government is certainly helping, and that will foster innovation and perhaps the adoption of blockchain. But you have to find a very solid reason why you want to apply blockchain. You have to prove that it reduces costs, it's immutable. It's very difficult, and to your point, to convince centralized and institutionalized countries such as the US or Japan, where there's a lot of incumbent, to let go of their business model. It's a fight, but I think if we don't start fighting, we'll never get there. So, but to your point, Estonia is a place, UAE could be next, and I think big Western country could perhaps learn one thing or two from you guys. So.
Other questions from the audience? Got one in the back.
Hello. Hi everyone. So as appealing as it sounds to have the data on blockchain, health-related data, and that would aid research for a lot of people, how do you tackle a situation when someone comes up and says, okay, I don't want my data to be there anymore, because, you know, that's not an option with blockchain. So
the question is to me, right? Right, so we are not storing the data on the blockchain. This is not the use case. I mean, how big would the blockchain become? As I said, we are combining it with a high-performance database. So they are first only uploading the metadata of their research and make it searchable. The underlying data is stored in an interplanetary file system, and only they have the private key. So they can decide in any moment of time to share this data or not. The data also doesn't sit with us, so we only make the metadata searchable on our platform. And the data is secured by the blockchain, by the key, and the owner of the data can decide when he wants to share it or not.
So every time the underlying data changes, the metadata is also changed, and then the entire chain is triggered, is it?
No, so you conduct an experiment. You have a protocol, and you can extract the metadata, make it searchable, and the underlying data you put into the database. And after you conducted an experiment, you might start a new one or you change the protocol, but then that's another experiment, so you don't have to change the data, even though you could. So with our solution, you can still tweak the metadata or the underlying data.
Thanks.
Any other audience questions?
In the U.S., there's the National Association of Realtors, and it is a trade consortium that is made up of over 1,200 different.
Is there a question back there?
Independent real estate organizations.
Like,
some exist at the national level.
Using the blockchain, have you been able to automate the CRF for investigative trial? So the CRF is stored in a blockchain when you do a clinical trial? The CRF is the case report format. So when you do a clinical trial, are you able to store all the CRF for the clinical trial using blockchain?
That's a great question. If you actually get involved in the clinical trial space, you realize how backwards we are, right? We still use fax, right? I was just in Poland, and we literally the entire sites have like books and like files and files and files. So, no, we are light years behind when it comes to the idea of actually how we document data from the clinical trials. We are light years behind. So it's a great business opportunity if you want to start a business in there.
the mic. Need the mic. Guys. Can we get the mic? Seriously. We have a question.
Thank you so much, Mazen from Dubai Health Authority. Quick question to Mr. Karim. How much blockchain case studies in healthcare is coming out of universities? What is your advice in terms of getting more research out of universities into specifically healthcare or other industries coming within the blockchain technology?
I think the biggest issue is not blockchain, by the way. If you're talking about, it as a field of technology, there's been a lot of research starting since 1991. So it's not really a new technology per se. It just the adoption of blockchain and healthcare, even at the frenzy of the cryptocurrency or ICOs in 2007, if you look at the percentage of projects that are healthcare related versus the overall project that were able to go to the market and raise funds, it's still less than 6-7%. So really blockchain has not really married healthcare, both at the research or the practicality of things, and for a variety of reasons. One, because the healthcare market, at least the way we have it in the US, is very fragmented. For instance, and the relationship between the patients and the providers, the principals, who are both involved as stakeholders, is completely disfranchised. It's owned by insurance carriers, it's owned by hospital systems, and they themselves have been grown via a variety of rollout. So we have not really seen, it's a case we study with healthcare as an EMR is a solid case, but I think that's going to be the last thing that ought to be tackled. Although it's the most obvious thing to tackle, but I think because of the variety of stakeholders, because of, without naming a few, Epics and Cerners and healthcare systems that actually build businesses to hoard data and to sell it, it will be extremely difficult to solve it. It will get solved, but we have to find a compromise.
You guys, either of you, comments on that?
Hi, good evening. I need to know about it for the global commercial strategy related with the digital invention. What is the prospect about the disabled patients? What is the option you can make for him in hospitality way about it, the criteria?
Disabled? What do you mean by disabled?
Disabled patients, when the disabled patient like a deaf and dumb peoples. Because I see everywhere, everybody is doing for the blockchain, but they not get the option of the deaf and dumb peoples. They are the part of our life and most important peoples. We doesn't make any, does we make any, make for option for these guys also?
It depends on what study we're talking about, right? So I've done clinical studies where I've used voice, for example, right? So we are using voice. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a drug for depression that just came out about 2 weeks ago, and we are building algorithms to predict depression based on voice. We're building algorithms to predict suicides based on voice. We go to Korea, for example, with a drug in the market for suicide prevention based on voice algorithms. So we're building things on voice. When it comes to eye, we have a huge ophthalmology department. We are pretty innovative and very forefront in what we are doing with ocular surgery. We make devices for that. We have drugs for glaucoma and for sight improvement, right? So we are definitely looking at that particular market. If it takes in Alzheimer's, for example, we get dementia in Alzheimer's. We are still one of the biggest investors in Alzheimer's. We just put in $2 billion last week, actually, in Alzheimer's research. So we're still pushing forward. So we're definitely in the market. So we are definitely looking up for anyone. We're definitely in that space. Investing.
Advice on those peoples, they are in the third world countries and they wants to make option into like poor countries, right? And they want to make an option for for the disabled peoples for the low cost.
Yeah, so when it comes to disabled people and how, as the industry, how we approach that, right? So we have a partnership actually with Uber, right? I know Uber just acquired Karim now, right? Like in the Middle East, but in the back end of Uber, there is something called Uber Health. So we partner with them where we actually send Ubers to pick up patients, but the driver has no idea what they're doing. So the driver does not know that's the patient. The driver picks them up, but we pay for it. So that happens. That happens. We do a lot for those patients. In the back end, we have free drug programs. We'll give out free drugs. We have transportation services. So we're invested in that space.
Can I add to this? I think with blockchain. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
I think what blockchain will perhaps enable, the ownership of data and the availability of data of rare diseases, for instance, that's somehow neglected by some firms in general, right? Because of the low return on invested capital, and it will enable the disabled, the less fortunate ones to probably have a wider voice because their numbers will slightly increase, and in a global ecosystem, and I think that will probably will probably incentivize more businesses to cater to their needs. And as you have more data and they have more voices, and you're collapsing silos of countries or ecosystems, I think it could only be positive for minorities, whatever you want to describe that minority. It could be disabled of any kind.
And don't forget also that the business model for pharmaceutical companies now is to go after rare disease. So the fewer people have a disease, that's what we actually go after, because we make more money that way as opposed to going. So I make more money on someone with a very rare disease that's like 1,000 people with a disease as opposed to heart failure, for example, right, or high blood pressure. I can't charge tens of money for heart failure. So this is called like a rare disease, and you have orphan drug designation. We actually charge more. So if you look at Pfizer, Merck, Novartis, everyone is going after rare disease. So I don't think the rare disease patient population is being ignored. That's where the market is.
Thank you.
Up front.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Usama from Dubai Health Authority. So suppose that we want to build our own project or a use case for blockchain. For me as an organization, what type of skill sets, competencies are required to do that? So I'm not talking about just mere developments, or maybe we need data engineers, we need people who knows cryptography, or at least know how to use cryptography. From where we can get these kinds of talents, how we can build them from within the organization? What's the journey for that?
Yeah, so we face the same problem to acquire some talents, because normally directly Amazon, Apple, they all come and fish them away, and we are not that a huge company and we can't compete with them, but there are a lot of talents. So we hired in India, for example, the IITs, the Indian Institutes of Technology, IIT Bombay. So we have a lot of these folks, and they are pretty good. And yeah, it's a challenging market, because these people everyone wants to have them. But there are a lot of institutes, there are a lot of new universities who are looking into this field, having a data scientist study or data engineering, which was not there 10 years ago. So it's coming.
I think you got to think about it as there's a shortage of solidity engineers, which is like the quote-unquote the language that developers need to code on, at least the Ethereum, right? So similar to Java, right? So there's an issue of supply and demand. And I think as obviously as the technology matures, obviously there will be more people who are properly trained. And in case of Dubai, for instance, because of the resources and because of the intent of the government to have a blockchain-enabled country, I do believe that you need to probably build a center of excellence that not only cater to the healthcare, but probably cater to the overall ecosystem of your economy, and you probably can have it from within. You can start by importing talent. IIT is an example, or the talent is everywhere nowadays. But we think the best way for you is to have it in-house. as opposed to kind of being on a constant outsource of a sort, especially that this is something that is extremely important for your ecosystem.
Exactly. Maybe if I can add to that. So we have an office in Germany. I'm based out of Germany, and we saw that there are rarely talents in Germany. And therefore we also are in, and there came a lot of guys from consultancy firms hired by our government asking us what they can do to build up their own center of excellence. And we are working together with them. We have actually CSR programs where we go to schools and teach the young people data science, data engineering. We are working together with the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. They build a blockchain hub in close cooperation with us. So I can only agree. It's of course important to also build the local expertise and not only outsource it.
Okay. Oh, one more.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. I'm okay to share my data set with the company. You know, they have a strong technology with the blockchain AI algorithm. But what do you think about to share a genomic data set with AI and blockchain companies? As I know, there's one famous company in Boston. They ask people to share their genomic data set. You know, they save. You know, they are going to develop new therapy, precision medicine, and all kinds of AI product later on. But what if I change my mind? Okay, I want my genomic data set back. Is it possible? I don't know. What do you think about sharing genomic data set with the company?
I'm glad you're out of Boston. If you look at patients like me, for example, based in Boston, patients like me, biggest investor is iCarbonX out of China, for example, right? Because they're interested in that, and iCarbonX is also the biggest investor in 23andMe, right? So they're interested in genomic data. GSK, for example, they have $200 million to 23andMe as well, right? Today, there's a huge data market in the back end. That whether you all know, hospitals sell data, insurance companies sell data, hospitals sell data, everyone is selling data. So that's already happened. So the challenge here is it identified data or de-identified data, which is, you know, so there's always a data market with or without blockchain, right? So it's already there. And actually, before I came here, I was in San Francisco, and I was talking to one of the professors that work on the Human Genome Project, and we were talking about data privacy. And he told me, he says, we spend so much time worried about our DNA data, genomic data, and he goes, on a larger scale, we are all related. Right? If you actually open up all our genomic data, there's one point where you're connected to someone, but it's not even secret anymore. That's what important. So it's actually advocating for the need for open data.
And the reason why it's possible is because sequencing is just so cheap nowadays. So there are two approaches that I saw in the recent past. One is getting the patients, do the tests on your own. There are actually companies who are doing that, and then just selling the data. And of course it's anonymized, but that could be one approach. Or the second approach, there are companies which are building AI-based algorithms which are looking at the genomics data of a patient, and it's in-house, in a hospital. And then they compare it, or they look at the possible drugs for the treatment and how it fits to the gene of the patient. And this is all inside the environment of the hospital. So they don't get the data, but like this you can also enable precision medicine.
Okay, I think we are just about out of questions. Before I thank the panelists, I have an announcement for you all. There's another amazing event coming up at the end of this month. AI Everything Summit takes place April 30th to the 1st of May. It's organized by Dubai World Trade Center and hosted by the Office of UAE Minister of the State for AI and UAE AI Council. It's already looking to be one of the biggest AI events in the world with the most impressive speakers. So make sure you register to attend. It looks like we're going to play a video just to follow this, but before that I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists here. Great information, great job. Thanks guys.